Hi guys, welcome back to the video. I've had a couple of days break in between painting this white layer. When we left off I was actually doing a little bit of detail work. I had a couple of hot days in between, so unfortunately I couldn't do any more actually on the job, but today I'm sitting down and having a little bit more of a swing at it. I've decided to go about things slightly differently. Originally I was intending on painting these skulls in the background, do it all in white first, even the major background in white, the cross that I'm going to do up there later on. But what I've decided to do is I'm going to come in and visit this one with black, just so I can show you how to crisp things up and make it look a little bit more like a nice skull. And then I'll go on in further videos to actually do the background. I'm going to do it that way so you don't have to kind of scan through the whole video to find the bits that might help you the most. Doing it this way, hopefully you'll see one full finished project and then obviously a couple more finished projects, and then the background probably is another video project and there's another video. Anyway, today I'm going to use the Spectratex black. I'm going to mix it up exactly like I did with the white, around about 50% black and around about 50% water. I'm mainly doing that because I want to thin the paint down a little bit so it doesn't build up too quickly. And any leftovers I have, I normally just add back into the bottle, even though it reduces the colour of the bottle a little bit. It doesn't matter too much. And a little bit of water. My pressure is going to be set on around about the same as it was for the white, which is about 30 psi. And I'm using the same gun and the same setup as I was pretty much with the white. You could dial your pressure down a little bit if you wanted to do a little bit more detail work. Leaving the white here isn't something that I'd normally do. Normally I'd go in and do a fair bit of texture work to that, as I said earlier, finish up the backgrounds, and then I'd go in and do black over the whole lot. It just saves obviously swapping in between colour. And another thing it saves is later on when I do these specific skulls in the background here, and I start doing them with white again, it's going to overspray a little bit of this black work that I'm doing now, but that's no problems. Right at the end what I'll do is a final little black cleaning layer which will take care of any overspray from these skulls in the background. I'm nearly ready to go here, so I'll just give myself a little bit of a test spray. Alright, and it's exactly the same as what I was doing the other day on the actual white. Most of it will be done freehand, but I'm also going to utilise some freehand shields today, probably mainly the oval one. I've also got a circle one which is good for other things, and some other stencils or freehand tools that I'll use is French curves. I've got a couple of different sizes of my French curves, and just a little homemade stencil that has a lot of different style curves and oval shapes on it. So I'll probably use a few of them just to crisp the actual project up a little bit, rather than finishing everything freehand. That's up to you how you decide to do it. The first thing I'll do is spraying along my edge. I want to spray actually away from the stencil, so I'll angle my airbrush up a little bit, and I definitely don't want to be too close when I'm doing this. Give yourself a little bit of distance. Just basically going around the stencil there. You can see I've missed the line a little bit, but that's okay. Match it by rotating the stencil, and then just blend that line in. Because it's an opaque black, it'll only go so dark. And so straight away, hopefully you can see that's crisping up that forehead area a little bit. I'll zoom in on the camera. I do apologise for the lighting conditions today, even though it's a bit cooler, it's certainly a little bit darker. But I'll try to adjust the camera as I go so you can hopefully see what I'm doing. There we go, I'll just turn up the brightness a little bit. You can see now that I've zoomed in, there is a lot of overspray from the earlier white layers that we're doing. But again, this is really what this stenciling and this black layer is going to sort out and clean up. I've done a little bit on the forehead there, or on the skull's head, but what I'm going to do now is clean up these eyes. The other day I started putting another line inside, which will be, you know, kind of the thickness of the bone, if you know what I mean. Because these eyes are going to be completely cut out, not in a traditional skull fashion, but again, going with my original theme. You can see these two big lines that I've still got going through the picture, which were earlier reference lines for the composition. These will disappear now once I actually start filling this in. and outline it all first. I'm not really that worried about overspraying the black because I'm going to end up spraying a fair bit of black into these areas anyway, so you won't really notice the overspray. Again, if you're worried about the overspray, just angle your brush away from the area you don't want overspray, or just put your hand there. So again, all this black's really doing, especially primarily, is just cleaning up a lot of this white earlier overspray. Must admit I didn't clean the gun out from the other day, so it's probably going to play up a little bit on me, but again, I'm not really worried too much about details in these basic styles. Every now and then the compressor does kick in, so I try to edit around that. Stop painting for a little while it does charge up again, or actually remember to turn it off. So you should be able to see on the video there that this is all starting to get rid of that earlier line that was going through. And it definitely looks a lot blacker. A little bit around this other eye now. You'll notice that even though earlier I said angle away from where you don't want to overspray, sometimes it's hard for me to do because I'll block the camera, so I'll just tend to throw a little bit of overspray into the area instead and worry about fixing it up a little bit later. But just in case you kind of click onto the fact that I'm always painting from this kind of 45-degree angle, it's so you can actually see what I'm trying to paint here. If I was actually doing this as a bit of a fun piece or a personal piece without the camera there, I would be spraying more directly onto the canvas, and I can move my body around a lot more without blocking the camera off and no big dramas. But when I'm filming, I tend to have to change my style a little bit, just so you can see what's going on. Alright, we can see there the two eyes are a little bit out. This one obviously goes up a fair bit higher than what this one does. So what we can do now is adjust it. It'll get rid of that nice white outline that I had around it earlier, but that's fine because I can put that in again later. You see now, it was quite easy to adjust. This is what I use this black layer for now, because it is a freehand piece, and earlier on when we were initially going in with that white we might have made a few mistakes. You can now use the black to actually clean all that up and basically reshape things the way that you see fit. Same thing up around the back here of this eye. You can see this back of the eye here goes up a lot more, so I'm going to try to replicate that and actually bring it down a little bit. I'm getting a little bit of hesitation on the line work here. Again, the brush is pretty dirty, so that's probably 90% of the problem. But because I'm spraying in big areas and I'm not doing much fine detail, it's not really a drama to me. When I come in to do fine detail later, I'll definitely give my brush a little bit of a clean. So that's evened out those eyes just a little bit. Sometimes I kind of get too carried away with me painting, not to actually look at what the video is filming. So I do apologise if the camera moves around a little bit or goes on weird angles. Most of it's held up by blue tack. So I want to do the same now for this nasal area. Although earlier on I would like a little bit of white overspray in there, so I don't want to cover that completely, especially around the edges. The main areas that are going to be dark are right in the centres where that kind of nozzle area, or nasal area I should say, goes back into the actual skull. So you'll find around these kind of white lines that we've got here that you will just see a little bit of the edge of that interior bone structure. So I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm about a centimetre away here. Then just mainly filling in with that little bit of an area that I was just talking about. I'm actually doing it like there's some little round shapes in there, similar to those tear shapes that I put on the nose the other day with the white. And what I'm going to do is just step back a little bit so it's not so concentrated, the black, and then just go over this white that I was talking about a little bit earlier, just a little bit. I don't want it looking white. What I want it to do is just get that little bit of black overspray on it to make it look a little bit darker. You might not notice the effect there on the actual camera, but you can still just make it out in real life. Now I'm just going to reshape these areas here. Again, we could use a stencil and go on the inside of the stencil there, just to get nice sharp edges on, actually in the nose area. But generally I find with black, you can actually get pretty close and do some, pretty close detail without the use of stencils for a lot of it. Again, it all just depends on the type of look that you're looking for. And because I've already filled that centre bit in, you won't be able to see the fact that it is just a bit of an outline. This all blends in and looks like. Basically what I want to do now is I want to go around the outside a little bit and clean up some of the outside details. I do quite often turn my pictures, as you've probably seen in some of my videos. I mainly just do that because I do sit down a lot to paint and I actually find it nice and easy. Obviously if you're doing a car or something like that, it's near impossible to flip the thing over, so it is handy to kind of get used to painting straight up and down all the time. But when you're doing canvas work, if you can flip the thing around, I kind of say why not. So I just want to do a little bit more cleaning up here on some of these edges. You can see I'm kind of taking a fair bit of a chunk out of this white and recoating it with a bit of black here, just using that inner surface of my stencil there, this one here. Right, what I'm doing is I'm just reshaping these jaw areas a little bit. If you remember correctly when we did that white, I was saying that they looked a little bit thick and I had to make a couple of little adjustments, so I'm just cleaning up some of those adjustments in the overspray from them. Right, so once you've actually masked in those two basic shapes, you can just blow away some of that external overspray with the black. But again, I'm not too worried because later on I'll be coming back in and obviously doing a lot more work here. It may be very hard to pick up in the camera, but hopefully you can see here. You can see the overspray still kind of going on up around this jaw area here, but here it's starting to look black and nice and sharp again. I find this tool really, this oval shaped freehand stencil really handy when it comes to skulls because it's got some shapes on it that really fit jaw lines. So you'll find when you look at a skull reference, a lot of it is like ovular shapes, or ovals. Anywhere that you can't really pick up a curve, you could try a different tool, right? Or just to show you the alternative, you can cut it in with your hand. I won't explain that process too much here because nearly every video that I've done on YouTube shows it, so you can see it's not quite as sharp a line as what your stencil creates, but it is sharp enough basically for what we're trying to do here with the basic skull. I'll go around and do the rest of the exterior of the lobby. Turn it right around so I can match what I did on that other side. Again, I'll do this bottom bit by hand just to save me running around looking for the right stencil shape. And being a bit of a jawline, you'll find a lot of this is going to get darkened down later anyway, so any little overspray, it doesn't really matter. You'll find that I'm pretty liberal with my distances when I do spray. That's only because I don't want to be, obviously, within millimetres of the canvas absolutely all the time, or else it would take literally hours to get these kind of works done. They might look better in the long run because, you do spend so much time, but again, it depends what you're desiring to paint. What I want to do is, I've got a little bit of a curve here, I've got a nice match to that, so I'm going to actually spray into the skull a little bit whilst I clean up the outside of this one. And I'm keeping my distance, letting the actual stencil do the work for me. I'll zoom in a little bit on the camera so you can see some of these details going in. So hopefully you can see in this area, just having that little bit of overspray is already starting to darken down this jaw area for me, which will be quite dark later. If you remember from the other day when I was doing the white, I was talking about having my light source kind of in the centre, up above and probably to the right a little bit, considering how I did this slightly to the right. What I'll end up doing is doing a lot of shading, obviously to suit that. So these areas kind of here will be quite dark in the long haul. Anything that doesn't pick up light from that top surface will get a bit of shading, but we'll go into the shading a little bit in a second. I'll get the outside shape basically finished and cleaned up. So again, it's just a case of going around and finding the right shape of your little stencil here. And then if you have to not quite fully match it and it ends up kind of cutting that earlier work off, we did, no big drama. All it does is reshape it slightly. So again, I'll get this bigger curve out. Just see this area around here. This is why I don't use a lot of stencils, guys, because as you can probably see, I'm really having to lock the camera a fair bit, basically just to hold it. And secondly, it takes a while to find the right match sometimes, and by that time I could have already carried a few of it in and been done with it and moved on. But as everybody knows, hand shielding doesn't create quite as sharp edges as what stencil shielded stuff does. And being a little bit sharper, the stencil stuff can look just a little bit crisper and cleaner. Well, so you can see I've just cleaned up that edge there. Do the same on the other side while I'm here. Again, you can see there I haven't got a perfect match to my line, but that doesn't worry me, because what I want to do is block that out and reshape it a little bit anyway. You can see I'm not going too far down. I'm just spraying up towards the top area there. And also something I'm trying not to do is kind of get rid of these earlier circles that I drew on, the earlier ovals, because they are my references for where I want the next skulls to sit. I'm going to use one of my French curves just for this last little bit, because it has some shapes in it that include longer lines and obviously what my oval template does. But in this particular application, you can see if I'm not careful, I'm going to go into that cheek area here. So I'm going to angle away from the cheek a little bit, because it's only really just to clean up that last little bit of that edge. You can see there, I've just cleaned up this tiny little bit of an edge without actually going into that cheekbone area. I'll now utilise my oval template there, similar to what I did on the other side. Again, you can see that I'm spraying away from that corner a little bit so my overspray doesn't go up into this area here. And I'm spraying from around about, I'd say 2 centimetres there. While you've got that little template held there, you can just throw a little bit of paint out into this external area here just to cover any overspray from that initial white. Try to match the same size. I'll just let that drop off. Sometimes it's good to match the same sizes of what you used on each side. This one's going to be a little bit different here, so I will drop down a little bit, just reshaping a fraction. One thing you'll notice by doing freehand is you will get proportion issues and little things like that, but when it's all said and done, it's a freehand picture, so it's more for fun. It's not something that I'd most likely do on a vehicle or anything like that. If I am doing that kind of work, I generally do work off sketches or overhead vectors just to make sure all my proportions are right. But again, I'm just using the bottom of that template there just to start shading into this area a little bit. And I've probably stepped out to around about 3 to 4 centimetres there. I do just need to charge it with the compressor again, so I shall do that quickly. Well, what I plan to do now is that now we've gone around most of the actual feature of the skull is to work out roughly my lighting aspect of the picture. I did mention that my lighting is going to be coming from pretty much directly above and slightly to the right. So what I need to do is actually sit there and have a little bit of a think about how the light would actually cast across some of the shadows of the face. You really got to have a bit of an idea of anatomy when you do this, because you got to know what's going to be further away from the camera and more likely shaded by something else. especially around nose areas and around the forehead. Obviously, if the light's up here, a lot of the forehead is going to be quite bright, where it's going to seem to get a little bit darker as you go through the actual picture itself. So that's what I'm going to try to replicate. You'll notice that when I do actually do my shading, my first initial layers are going to be from probably around about 5 centimeters out, 3 to 5 centimeters out. As I complete a layer of shading, I'm going to then move forward so I can increase the intensity of shading that I desire to increase the intensity of. And I'll do that by just moving slightly closer again. Then again, when I do the final layer, that's when I'm going to be quite close to the actual canvas and doing a little bit more detail, maybe a few more lines and things like that, just to actually bring it all together. Right, so what I'm going to do is some of this big shading first. One area I'm going to start is under this lie ridge. What I'm doing here is what's called lifting lines. You start close and then you're actually lifting away as you're actually doing the stroke. I find it a pretty useful stroke for a lot of portrait type applications. Anything that looks a little bit dodgy from those early white layers, you can cover up. See, I covered up this big line that was going all the way through there, but I actually left a little bit here and I left a little bit there just to give a bit more of an idea of contour. The nose, the cheek ridge itself is going to pick up a fair bit of light, so I'm not going to touch that too much. I'm just maybe going to overspray a little bit of black overspraying there just from a bit of a distance, especially around towards the back top parts of those bone sections. And again, I'm just doing little line strokes like this. It's almost like a dagger stroke, but I'm doing it from a fair distance away from the actual canvas. The picture on the actual computer there looks a little bit grainy. Hopefully it doesn't come through that way when I actually go to edit it all up. It might be grainy because of the light today. It is very, very low, so I'll see if adjusting the brightness helps with that a little bit. Looks a little bit better on the screen there. Alright, because it's top right, my light source, I'm not going to go quite as dark on this opposite side here, although I'm going to follow a very similar kind of idea to the contours. Again, if I wasn't filming this, I would be doing it from this kind of an angle. But again, I'm not too worried about overspray. Not for this kind of project. You can see I don't need to get too close and put too much detail, because those little white lines that we put in earlier, even if we do cover them a little bit with black, they still come through that black because we are doing it from a fair bit of a distance away. So you'll generally find that that gives the impression that it's actually stopping that black from going up anymore. So again, I can do these from quite a fair bit of a distance, around about 3 centimeters there, I'd say. And you can do a little bit along the bottom here, but you can see that I'm avoiding this highlight. I'm just going to add a little bit of a curve there as well, a little bit closer now, probably around about 2 centimeters away. And I'm just going to drift out, I'm still throwing a little bit of paint just to kind of softly blend that out. And you can see it hasn't come up quite as dark in this area. And then a little triangular shape from there, and I blend that side with the cheek back down into this straw area. This is just the basic U shape that I'm doing now, just a line from around about 1.5 centimeters away. Later on I plan to run some more lines up the side of the nose there, so it'll all blend into that. Right, another real dark area is going to be in the back of the jaw here, but again we put a bit of detail and a little bit of work in here with some white. We don't want to cover that white completely, so don't take your black to 100% intensity. Again, use distance just to shade it down to the required shade. And you can see that I'm spraying completely over that white that we did on that initial layer. This is just going to help shape things a little bit better and actually make things look like they recede. There's a bit of a triangular shape in here. I can come a little bit closer. You can see I always start from the corners, work up and work down into those corners. And painting on both up and down strokes. little bit more shading just below that cheekbone. Again, I don't want to make that white disappear completely, but I really want to soften it back down into the background. Same in here, it's a bit of a U shape, similar to what we did on the outside of it. So I'm going to be a little bit closer now. Again, think about your angle. If I did have the choice, I'd be spraying from a slightly different angle from this way over to this way, so my overspray is going into those dark areas and not potentially going into the painting. Now I just want a little bit of a line in between those two lines and just further soften them down just a fraction. So how much you soften things down, how much you don't soften things down is a bit of a thing that you need to practice over a bit of time, especially when you are coming up with your own light sources for pictures and that. Sometimes you do something that just doesn't quite look right, and you might change the actual light source to suit. So same thing on this side. I'm just pretty liberally spraying in from around about 4 to 5 centimetres away, shading that intense white back a little bit. I'll just pump my pressure up a little bit because my gun is a little bit dirty and that'll help push it through a bit. Now I'm about 30, 35, 35. And then I'm mainly doing that because my gum's dirty. Should be a good boy and stop and clean it all out, but sometimes when I get a chance to paint, I've got to take every minute that I can. Earlier on we were using our little stencils here, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around the edge of this oval shape, just to start cutting a bit of a shadow there, and then working off that. You see, if you're a fair distance away, this little bit of overspray won't really bother you on that white. Later on we can always introduce some more white to, cut in our highlights anyway, so don't be too worried about overspray, especially when you're first starting airbrushing. So you have to continue that line into the face area a little bit, and then I'm going to shade off that line just so it blends into the actual curve that I've got going on up there. And it's starting to come together a little bit there, and so I'm not going to go overboard on this initial shading layer. I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see what's kind of going on there. Obviously I've done a very, very square jaw here. When it's all said and done, that was half intended, but it's also been a bit of a pleasant surprise the way it's turned out. I quite like the look of it when it's all said and done. Obviously you wouldn't have the angle going so intensely into the face here, you'd have it coming up a little bit straighter. But once all this dark shading is done, it's going to be hard to tell where the actual teeth stop in this area anyway, so in essence it'll clean up a lot of this really tight look here. Like it looks that way at the moment because obviously all the white there. I'm just going to use my fingers here and cut in a little bit of another nose shade there. I'm just, again, keeping my distance, I'm around about 5-6 centimetres away. Because it is lit up on the right, I mainly took that shade, or shadow I should say, into the left there. Whilst I'm here, if I can get my gun spraying nicely, I'm going to actually draw a line through the teeth area here and re-outline some of these teeth, because this white line that I put there originally was just a bit of a guide to what I'm doing now. I really need to darken this, these teeth down a little bit, so what I'll do is I'll just draw a line in between the teeth. I'm within a centimetre there. I'll draw a fine line first, and then I can fill in the little gaps here. I'm just doing little triangles now. The gun's not spraying very nicely, but I'll zoom in a little bit. So hopefully you can see a little bit more of what I'm doing there. And what I'm also going to do is make my life a little bit easier because of the way it's spraying. Go up a little bit there. down a little bit there. I'm going to use my little ovals. I'll start on the bottom ones first. So what I'm just doing is going around the top and slightly the underside of that stencil. Going from around about, would have been about 1.5 centimetres, 2 centimetres away. You see, you still don't have to be super close when you're doing stencil work. And now I'm going to do the same on this one. But when I get in the middle area there, I'm just going to fill it in. Again, don't worry too much about your overspray because they'll still be darkening the teeth down a little bit later anyway. Now I'm going to have to move to a smaller stencil. Then filling in the tiny little areas in between the teeth as well as I go. You've already done the teeth in the white there, so you just use them as a bit of a guide. Let a little bit of the white outline come through. There's no harm in that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right up to the edge here. And then blend it off into those foreshadows. So you can see they've gone right to the edge. You ought to do the same on the other side, so I'll flip the picture over. Come down a little bit on the camera there. And I'll just try to zoom in even a bit more. So you can hopefully see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about filling in these little areas here. And you can always go back if it hasn't quite completely darkened it down to that 100% that I want in that shadow. You can just go in there by hand and actually do a little bit more work. I was nice and close in, obviously. So again, it's just a case of finding the shape that suits the best. Exactly the same as what I did on the other side there, all close enough. And so that's the bottom teeth kind of semi-sorted out there. Now I want to do the same with the top teeth. Again, you'll notice what I generally try to do is pick up which two are the centre teeth. So it's that one and that one down the bottom, it's that one and that one up top, and try to use the same stencil for each one. So not going all the way, I'm only using kind of half of this overcoat. Just have to adjust the stencil a little bit. Sorry if you can't see that very well. I'll try to get a different camera angle for this, so you can actually see what I'm doing with the stencil. There you go. Just a bit of paint all over myself. And the stencil, so luckily I caught that before I put it on the painting. Generally a lot of the time I would just be doing these absolutely freehand, especially if my gum was paint actually going a little bit better. to do is put a nice straight line in between those two teeth. This time I'm just going to do it with my hand. Whilst I'm here, I might do a few of the other ones with hand again to show you a bit of a difference between the two methods. And secondly, because I find it easy. Still got paint all over myself here. Alright, so back to doing these teeth a little bit. I'm just pretty much doing these lines in freehand now. And in pretty much the same fashion as you would with the stencil. But as you can see, a lot quicker to do. And you can see I'm not bringing these lines up too far, because I want to shade away from them soon anyway. Whilst I'm here, I'll just flip the canvas over because I want to do the shadows at the bottom of the teeth. I think I nearly get there on the camera. I might just need to pick up the camera a bit. There we go, there we go. Alright, again, you got the option of using your stencil, just doing a little bit of a triangular shape away from it. Or you can use your fingertips. You do the same thing. I am working from a fair bit of a distance here, guys. I'm not too close to the picture, but what I'm basically drawing is a triangle shape coming away from those teeth. So I want to do that on the rest. You can see I've still left a little bit of white poking its nose through. This earlier white, when it's all said and done, is just, if you want to leave it there for a highlight, if you don't want to leave it there for a highlight, it doesn't matter, but that actually marks where most of my shadows were, or where most of my shadows will be in this particular tooth. As you come around the side there, you can get a little bit closer and closer and closer, just so you can actually draw the lines in nicely. Or again, use your fingertip. And shade a bit of this area in here just to make it a little bit darker. And then working down into the actual draw area, but see how far away I'm lifting this, not even on the camera. As I was doing that stroke, I was lifting actually away from the work, so the overspray kind of shoots out. It doesn't matter if it covers up a lot of this white, because you know that area is going to be quite dark anyway. So same thing on the other side there. Use the stencil just so you can see the difference. So the main reason I don't use a lot of stencils, guys, is because I generally find, obviously, it's a lot quicker to do this kind of painting with my hands. If this wasn't a demo piece, this is literally half an hour's work. It's just because I'm slowing down and I'm trying to explain everything, that it will probably stretch out to an hour or more. And so that's basically the teeth part nearly finished. Just come back down, here we go. Mount a bit. So you can see how the back started to actually bring everything together now. What I want to do is, in between these white highlights that I've got for the teeth coming up, is I want to do like a bit of a triangular shape for the teeth area up there. It's very similar to what I basically just did down here. Now I'm just going to do some lines from a bit of a distance in between that earlier white work. Basically coming off the line that I did previously for the tooth itself. And as I go back, it's covering a little bit more disappearing a little bit into the distance. I can come a little bit closer, then just lift away and shade that a little bit, because obviously it's not going to be quite as bright in there as it is on this front part of the actual jawbone there. As it's going around the curve, it's going to get darker and darker and darker, especially because the light's up here, the nose is going to be shading that area a little bit. So to make sense of that, I'll get rid of this little bit of white here as well, and actually come around to join this up to there. And whilst I'm there, I'm just going to knock a little bit of this white highlight around the nose area itself. You see, I've just let that little bit of white still keep coming through though. Hopefully you can see a little bit of method in my madness here. So same thing on this side. Although this side's going to be lit up a little bit more, so I'm a little bit closer. I'm just continuing these lines up, and that's pretty much all I'm going to do there. But there will be a little bit of a shadow on the nose here as well, just not so much as what's on the other side. So again, I just built them a little bit closer and shaded down into this area a little bit, leaving this area nice and bright. Now what I want to do is just put a line around the teeth themselves. This line's going to be a bit of a distance away, just to knock down the white of those teeth a little bit, and give them a little bit of shape and actual dimension. And that's pretty much all I need to do for that. I'm going to knock down the top of these highlights a little bit too, because they do stand out a little bit. But again, when I say knock them down, I'm not making them disappear completely. You can still just see them kind of coming through. And this middle area here, we've got to have a bit of a line, a definite line going up from that. You can even do one down below a little bit as well. Ready? So you can see here, what it's starting to do is it's starting to fix up a bit of this jaw shape. I'm going to make this white here disappear a little bit, so it's very hard to tell where it's actually connecting and how far these teeth are going back. I can do the same thing over on this side. Again, there will be a lot of natural shadow there, so it doesn't matter if we knock that down a little bit. Alright. It's starting to slowly get there. Alright, what I'm going to do is just some general shading in around this jaw area. Again, the only bit I'm going to kind of keep intense and highlight is this, probably this front edge. The rest can just get, and all I'll do is lines, and I'll just slowly pull out. So there's a line from around about 2 centimetres away. I'll just join that one into that line there. Shade a little bit of that white down. Might end up with you in the head, I think, spraying that nicely at the moment. You can actually hear it. But because I'm doing shading from quite a fair bit of a distance, I'll just persevere with it and leave it be. One thing I didn't do earlier when I was doing all that outlining work was to actually outline the bottom there, so I'll do that quickly now while I'm here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to allow it to come up into that jaw area a bit. Just give it a bit more shape and definition. Same on this side. Just in case you match my right shapes. I'm about 4-5 centimetres away from the canvas at the moment. I'm mainly just getting rid of overspray, guys. And whilst you're getting rid of overspray, if you're spraying away from that stencil, you get your nice sharp edge there as well. And so there's probably a few things you can see on the camera there that could use a little bit of dulling down. This area here, a little bit of on this area here too, I think. You should be able to tell, but they just stand out just that wee bit too much, so all I'm literally going to do is whack a bit of paint over them. So you can still just see that white coming through, but it's certainly not as intense as what's going on over in this area. And we'll do the same in this area. you've got to remember a lot of this will be hidden or shaded by some of these features up here. But I am going to leave just a little bit of a highlight going through at the bottom there. So I'm going to not quite shade it back as much as I did on the side. Buff that down a bit as well. So starting to get there. You got to be careful, obviously, when you're doing this, not to go too dark. It's quite easy to do, but if you do go too dark, you can just always add some white back on it later, or a bit of light grey or something. You might get a bit of blue shifting, but that's okay. You just do some blue flame or something around it. Yeah, it makes sense. So then just shade down some of these intense highlights. If you shade down a highlight that you want to put back in, you just put it back in with white later. You find because a lot of this is overspray black, if I went back over this white, it actually won't blue shift very much because I'm not trying to go over, say, a true black like I've got in the eyes there. I might just shade this jaw down just that little bit more. I mean, I don't want to get rid of all my highlights there, but I'm just bringing this line in around here, which I was doing from around about 2 centimeters there, on a bit of an angle, just to actually nicely blend it in and make some nice contours there. I can do the same thing on this side. You can see I'm trying to avoid the white right next to it, but having that little bit of overspray lap into it just creates that nice blend between the two anyway. And I might just soften that down a little bit to suit the rest of the picture of what we got going on there. Alrighty, now time to skip up the top here. I might actually, before I do so, just clean this little area up here a little bit. I'm just going to bring a bit of a darker shadow in up around his nose. I'm around about a centimetre away now. Almost a detail stroke, but not quite. What it does is allow me to get in that little bit closer. I'm not actually trying to do a lot of detail per se with it. I'll bring the camera up a little bit. There we go. This top part will happen pretty quickly because, again, all I'm doing is doing a bit of shading from a fair bit of a distance. Generally what I like to do is do the eyebrow shading first, which again is just a little bit of a lifting line. Start it light. You can always build it up a little bit dark if you want to. You've got to remember that the top part of this forehead is actually going to be that slight brow line that's going on there. I better pull my finger out a little bit here, or else I'm definitely going to lose all the light that I need. Before I go too much further with that actual eyebrow shadow, I just want to put in a little bit of a detail feature here. So it's just going to be a bit of an area right in the centre on the top of the nose. I'm just going to use the top of that pencil there just to create a little bit of a nose arch. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a bit of an area to work my shading into. And so again, that overspray on that initial white line doesn't matter squat, and it doesn't matter a squat if we're actually cutting into this white here on the detail of the eye a little bit. A, it's going to shade it all down nicely to suit the rest, and B, we can always add the white highlights in a little bit later. Same thing on the other side. I'm around about 3 to 4 centimeters away here. I'm just following similar contours to what I did earlier when I initially outlined these brows. Shade them down just a little bit. Leaving a little bit of a gap there just to pick up a little bit of a highlight, and then as I come around this eye area, just going to make sure I go a little bit closer so it's a bit more of a true shadow in there. So a lot of the extra strokes that I do involved lifting, and most of them are lifting lines. So once you get proficient at actually creating a line, start actually lifting and angling your line, because that creates a lot of these blend effects. Alright, this stands out a little bit here at the moment, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to come back and revisit that in a second anyway. Right, but what I want to do is remember how I had this highlight coming through slightly on the right hand side. I want to just do a little bit of soft shading just to represent that nicely. It'll be one of the whitest areas of the actual skull, so there'll be a fair bit of dark shading going on here, a little bit less here because the light is on this side, and obviously an intense white spot in the middle. So again, from a fair bit of a distance, I'm just going over the previous white. You see I'm even going over the outline. And because we cut that outline in nicely a little while ago with the stencil and the black paint just to kind of clean up the outside, again I can just throw overspray over the whole lot of that and it'll still keep that nice crisp line. I can add some light lines coming into that highlight. I can still see those cracks that I did earlier as well, but I will do a bit more shading on them as well. Here you can see I've just put in a couple of little lines just to blend into that eyebrow shadow a little bit. It all really depends on what you want to do. There's no real right or wrong when you're doing fantasy skulls, in my opinion. Just do what you kind of like and what looks good. I'll zoom in a bit more here so hopefully you can see what I'm doing a bit better. Alright, so I've done a little bit of black shading here. Here I'm going to keep it lighter, and again these are just lines built on top of lines, but obviously I'm overlapping each line slightly just to make sure I'm getting a nice even gradient there. So it goes back in the skull here, especially down in the corner here. I'm going to add a little bit of shading. You can see I just use my hand there just to kind of protect this highlighted edge, just so I could shade this area of the skull down a little bit. The same thing here. Just use my hand to create that bit of an edge there, because obviously that won't be really highlighted, that area in the skull behind. I could even add cross those early lines I did earlier. I'm going to go even slightly darker now, so I'm just moving forward a little bit. I'm not spraying from quite a distance, about 3 centimeters away, just to darken this side of the skull down a little bit, especially as I want my light source coming up here. You see these are a little bit too liney looking. What I'm going to do is just fatten them up. They don't look quite as much like lines. And then just even over that white, this white highlight, I'm just going to do a little bit of a stippling action, just move around a little bit. Lets a little bit of white through, but it doesn't really take that strong, contrast white away from the actual picture. It just softens it down a little bit. Whilst I'm here and I've got the camera zoomed in, I can do a little bit more work around the eye area here. Again, remembering our light sources up here, we're going to have a little bit of shading here, but it's probably going to pick up in this front edge. Same here, a little bit of shading in here, but where the light's potentially going to shine in some of this, I don't want to add too much black. I'm going to do a bit of a U shape here. Again guys, a lot of this comes with just painting a lot of skulls. Like you learn the anatomy, it's like portraits. You learn the anatomy pretty quickly and start understanding what needs to be light and what needs to be dark. Alrighty. Now same thing on this side. As I said, under here just probably a little bit darker. Those little lines there I was doing probably about 2 centimeters away. Again, you can still see I'm not getting that close to do detail yet. This area in the nose here needs to be darkened down a little bit. And now I am starting to do a little bit more detail strokes. Bring some of them out into that early work that you did here. You find that you'll only just be able to actually see it. See if I can adjust this camera a little bit better. It looks a little bit weird on the camera there. Increase the contrast maybe. Just come back a bit because that looks a bit too dark. So I'll try to match the actual video with roughly what I'm seeing in front of me, although sometimes it's pretty hard to get it perfect. Probably around about there, might make it just a touch brighter. I'll say that's pretty close. Proportion wise, what you're seeing is quite different to what I'm seeing in proportion. I'll take a photo of it later as well, because you are viewing it from a little bit of an angle, so it looks a little bit more elongated and a little bit thinner than what it actually is. Whilst I'm doing a little bit more detail work, I want to fill this area in here in the nose. So again, I'm probably within a couple mil now. I'm going to make that area in there quite dark. You can see hopefully there, it's just helped make this line stand out a little bit. It gives a bit more shape to the actual nose area. I'm going to just do a little bit of a stroke up the top there as well. Same there, just blend it around. And I might even just do the same down the bottom here. Airbrush is really playing up on me at the moment, but I haven't got time to stop to do any cleaning on it. I'm running out of light and I want to try to get this portion of the picture finished for you. I will just sometimes go on with airbrush it when it seems a bit dodgy. It's all good. Just keep going, see what happens. So you can see this side of the jaw I think is looking really nice. This side of the jaw still looks a little bit fried up around this area, so I'm just going to soften that back a little bit, even that white highlight there. Again, not quite as much as the other side, but just enough to start making it look natural. But I'm just going to add a little bit more shape to these lines and top teeth. I'm really losing light now, so a bit of a mad rush. It's more for filming. I can still see quite happily what I'm doing in front of me, but the film doesn't pick it up quite as good. So just a little bit more soft blending and I think this will be done for this particular part of the layer. Sort of working from quite a bit of a distance here. Just softening back things that I think need to be softened back a little bit. I definitely need to go a bit darker in there so that it doesn't stand out too much, that stenciled area that we did earlier. Bit of shading through the eyes so they meet. And you can see I'm not getting too close. So what I'm going to do now is just move around the picture and just shade down some of the left hand side highlights, but I'm going to leave some of these bright white highlights still kind of coming through on the right hand side. Again, just set my lights off a bit. This just involves a bit of a spray from the distance. And the last thing I'll do quickly before, hold on, a little bit of an area up here that needs to be fixed up. Just a little bit of added shading in there, soften that down a little bit there. Alright, I'll just charge up my compressor one more time. Then what I plan to do is basically just run some of these cracks through, and I'll call it finished at that particular stage. Later on, I do plan to do a bit of a twist with this video. I'm doing a bit of a basic section first to show you how you can create this quite basically, but then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with my white and that again later when the whole, or after the whole picture's finished. I'm going to come back in with white and black and actually do some detailed texturing layers to this. Then I'll most likely add flames to the whole job, and it should give quite an interesting effect, I hope. Right, last little bit before I definitely lose all my light tonight. I could do a lot more detailing with this black, but again what I'll do is I'll catch up the rest of the picture first, hopefully that gives you a bit of a basic idea of how you can start off creating some skulls just utilising freehand methods, and also obviously reasoning that you don't have to always use a reference or anything like that. Sometimes it's more fun just coming up with it out of your own head. Anybody can do it. As you can see, it's just basically made up of different shapes and different circles, ovals and things like that. Rearrange them slightly and you get a different looking skull each time. So I'd certainly recommend giving it a bit of a shot, even if it's just for fun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shade on the bottom of these little cracks that I've got through there. Obviously the white highlight being above, you'll see a shadow below that. So I'll just follow along this line here, just on the bottom. Also just bring another one off. You should be able to see that's come up in the camera right there, but I'm losing light, so I do apologise for the video if it is a bit dark there. One thing I do plan to be doing soon is getting a lot better studio set up to actually film a lot of these videos in, so I have got consistent lighting and a couple of different camera angles and things like that. So same thing on this little crack here. I am spraying with a couple of millimeters now. I won't go overboard on the actual cracks themselves. I will come back in later and add some white highlights and such too. Right, if you want a little bit of a lighter shade crack, move a little bit quicker. Sometimes it's very easy to go overboard with your cracks and things like that, and sometimes it can take a bit of a look away from the piece rather than add to it. So now I'm just fiddling. I told you that I wasn't going to do any detail later, but sometimes it's hard. You just see things that you want to chuck a little bit of detail in just to improve. But I won't go too far on that. I'll just obviously leave that kind of stuff up to you guys. I can't see anything else now that it's sticking out to me. You always find, as I said, things you want to improve in, and one of the worst things about being an artist is sometimes it's hard to kind of know when to stop. I'll just do a little bit of a detail on in between where that bone is cracked. So I just adjust my distance so I can do it in one stroke and fill the whole area up. That way I'm not going over it and over it and over it and potentially running lines where I don't want them and things like that. But for the time being, I think that will do. That's a little basic skull for you, so have a little shot. As I said, in later episodes of this video, I will go on and I'll just zoom out here a little bit so you can see the overall effect. Looks a little bit different now that you've zoomed out. So what I'll end up doing later on is obviously these two side skulls, the cross that I want to incorporate into the top here. That cross is basically going to be all on fire, and I do plan to have some fire coming down through these skulls here. So later on I will be adding, as I said to you a little bit earlier, just a bit of texture and also a little bit of hint of colour, just colour that be picked up from those flames. Before I do that, obviously I do have to come back in with white. I do have to hit my highlights again, so it gives the transparency that I will use for the colour something to tint. You can tint, obviously, the darker shade skull quite easily, depending on the type of look that you want to get, but obviously if you've got fire or something like that around it, you're going to have to brighten it up a bit. Now this is how I do most of my paintings. You can see that I've basically done a white and a black layer. Later on, whether it be these skulls that I do or whatever the case is, I might have to come back in and do a little bit more clean up with the black, but then I will come back in with the white layer yet again, do all my texture, and then I soften that back down again with black. So it's basically a layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, depending on the depth that you want in one of these projects. The more layers you put on, the more texturing layers you can utilise. This is primarily just a base foundation to what you could actually turn into like a really great piece of work. When it's all said and done, you can take these as far as you want. You can spend hours upon hours upon hours on them, or you can knock a couple out in a quick hour or two and see how you kind of go with them. But again, if I was doing a commission work, on a job or something like that, this painting would be getting probably 5, 6, 8 more layers before I was actually happy with the final aspect of it. I wanted to show the basic 2 layers so you can understand how you can adjust things and how you can manipulate things with this black after you've gone in very loosely with white. This is basically how a lot of people, I would guess, paint on black. You're really using your black, similar colour obviously to the canvas, as an eraser. So you can kind of come in and erase some problems out, change things, move things and all the rest of it. Anyway, I hope that's given you a bit of a good starting point for a bit of a skull for your own project. By all means, give it a shot, and if you haven't done so already, pop over to the new website that we've got up and running. It's www.newsite.airbrushanswers.com. Come say hello, and hopefully in a couple of weeks I'll have a few more of these videos chucked up at the site. Alright, thanks guys for watching.